Look at any normal crowd of people going about their day. We tend to assume that everyone here, including you, is operating with a built-in, reliable moral compass. If someone crosses the line into committing abuse or causing serious harm, we write them off as outliers. We classify them as criminals or psychopaths, people who lack the internal restraints the rest of us possess. But consider what happens if that boundary between decent and destructive behavior isn't determined by your personality. What if it is dictated by the pressure placed on you by the situation? The evidence suggests that our sense of control over our own actions is far more fragile than we are willing to admit. We know this because in the mid-20th century, researchers built controlled environments specifically designed to push ordinary people to their ethical breaking points. The trauma inflicted on the volunteers in these studies was so severe that modern science effectively outlawed these methods from ever being used again. Yet, the data they left behind survived. It provides a documented map of how easily human autonomy can be dismantled. The first mechanism of manipulation is authority. In 1961, Stanley Milgram invited volunteers to act as teachers in a learning study, instructing them to deliver electric shocks to another person for every wrong answer. The shocks started small, but grew increasingly severe with every mistake. The person receiving the shocks was an actor, and the machinery was a prop, but the volunteers believed they were sending high voltages into the next room. As the actor began to scream in pain, beg for release, and eventually go completely silent, the volunteers panicked. They sweated, they protested, and they clearly wanted to stop. And yet, they kept pressing the button. Their only reason was the presence of a man in a lab coat who calmly told them that the experiment required them to continue. This chart shows the escalating voltage levels of the experiment mapped against participant compliance. Milgram found that 65% of his subjects pushed the dials all the way to the final, potentially lethal voltage. Look closely at that number. In a standard population sample, 2 out of every 3 people will ignore their own ethics to satisfy a researcher's demand. When placed under direct pressure, individual morality consistently yields to the commands of a perceived authority. A decade later, researchers tested a second mechanism: environment. In 1971, a group of psychologically healthy college students volunteered for a study meant to simulate prison life in a university basement. This diagram illustrates how the volunteers were divided. There were no initial differences between them, but they were randomly assigned to play one of 2 roles, either the prisoner or the guard. Within days, the students assigned as guards started abusing their newfound power, enforcing arbitrary rules and subjecting the prisoners to sleep deprivation and intense humiliation. The prisoners didn't just play along, they experienced genuine psychological collapses. They became withdrawn, anxious, and deeply traumatized, forcing the team to shut the study down less than a week after it started. Personal identity is surprisingly thin. An immersive environment and an assigned role are powerful enough to overwrite who you believe you are. Authority overrides morality, and environment erases identity. But the final psychological force targets the will to act at all. In a series of experiments involving unavoidable stress, animal subjects would initially fight back and search for a way out. But eventually, they simply stopped trying, even when researchers finally provided an exit. They had been conditioned to believe that nothing they did mattered. Scientists call this phenomenon learned helplessness. When you strip away a person's agency for long enough, their brain begins to treat all effort as useless. They stop looking for exits, even when the doors are wide open. Under the weight of inescapable powerlessness, the instinct to resist simply shuts down. Authority, environment, and helplessness are the 3 distinct pressures that can bend a human brain until its independence evaporates. These patterns repeat far beyond the laboratory. They show up in workplaces where employees follow unethical orders to keep their roles, and in relationships where one partner is conditioned to believe they have no exit. The psychological mechanics remain identical. The researchers who first documented these limits crossed deep ethical lines to gather their data. But their work leaves us with a profound tool for self-defense. You cannot fight a force you don't recognize. Knowing how quickly you can be influenced by a title, a label, or a sense of ongoing defeat is the only way to maintain your autonomy. Armed with this awareness, you gain the ability to pause. You can see the system you are in, question the commands you are given, and refuse to be a passive subject in someone else's experiment.